the hall was trembling with noise. The kind of noise that didn't come from joy or celebration, but from scorn. It was the sound of whispers sharpened like daggers, laughter dipped in cruelty, and judgment heavy enough to crush the bones of even the strongest wolf. The grand hall of judgment rose high above her head, carved with marble pillars that stretched toward the heavens like they were meant to hold up the very weight of the gods. But tonight, it felt more like a cage. At the center, she stood. Bruised. Bloodied. Alone. The crowd gathered around her the way they once gathered in the ancient Roman marketplaces, hungry-eyed, waiting for a spectacle. Waiting for punishment. Waiting for her to be reduced to nothing but a tale they'd pass on to their children. And then, there was silence. The kind of silence that hums inside the chest, thick, expectant, like the whole world was holding its breath. Because the Alpha King had spoken. His rejection cut deeper than the silver shackles already weighing down her wrists. His words weren't just denial, they were erasure. They stripped her of worth in front of everyone she once called her people. "You are nothing to me," he had said, and those 5 words still rang in her skull like a curse. Thunder split the sky outside, rattling the stone walls of the hall. Rain lashed against the windows and sheets, each drop like a nail driving in her humiliation. It was as if the storm had been summoned by her shame, as if the heavens themselves recoiled at the sight of her standing there, stripped of dignity. She could feel her inner wolf clawing at the surface. Desperate. Hungry. Rage swelling beneath her skin, begging to be set free. But she couldn't let it. Not here. Not in front of them. Because if she lost control, they would not just mock her. They would destroy her. The crowd pressed closer. The whispers sharpened. Rejected. Cursed. Not even worthy to stand in his shadow. Each word was a stone thrown at her chest. Each laugh a chain around her throat. She could feel herself shrinking under the weight of their eyes. The weight of his rejection. The weight of everything she had tried so hard to prove, shattered in a single moment. But inside her, something refused to die. Her voice did not rise, but her soul whispered it fiercely into the storm within her veins. "If you will not have me, then I will not beg you." Her eyes lifted, though her body trembled. She stood beneath the shadow of the throne, beneath the man who had just discarded her like ash, and though her heart was breaking, though blood trickled from her temple and pooled at the corner of her lips, she found the courage to stand taller. Because the truth was this: rejection was not the end. It was the fire before the rise. The Alpha King turned his head, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet hers. And in that moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Not pity. Not compassion. Something darker. Something conflicted. The crowd didn't notice. They were too busy savoring her fall. But she noticed. She always noticed. The torches lining the hall sputtered in the storm winds, shadows dancing across the stone floor like predators circling prey. And maybe that's what she was now. Prey. Hunted. Outcast. But inside her chest, her heart beat louder than their laughter. She would not break here. Not before them. Not before him. And though she could not speak it aloud, though her lips remained pressed in silence, her spirit screamed, "One day, you will regret this. One day, you will remember this moment, and it will be the day the fire you rejected burned down everything you thought you controlled." The storm outside raged harder, as if answering her vow. And for those listening now, for those who have ever been cast aside, who have ever been told they were unworthy, who have ever stood in the center of a crowd and felt the sting of rejection sink into their bones, I tell you this: her story is not just hers. It is yours. It is mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever tasted shame and still dared to stand. This is where her story begins. In the silence after rejection. In the storm that followed humiliation. In the vow made when no one believed she had a voice worth hearing. This is not the story of a woman begging for love. This is the story of a woman finding the fire that cannot be denied. And if this fire has already touched your heart, If in these words you feel a spark, a pulse, a truth that shakes something deep inside you, then stay. Because her journey will take you into darkness and light, despair and hope, chains and freedom. Subscribe to Sophie's Romance Collections, where love burns brighter than rejection, where every story dares to heal the broken pieces we hide from the world. Now, let the storm carry us deeper into her night. The hall was already heavy with scorn, already drenched in the taste of humiliation, when the air shifted. It was subtle at first, almost like the pull of a tide before a wave, but every soul present felt it. The murmurs thinned, the laughter fractured into nervous silence, and then all eyes turned upward to the great dais where the Alpha King sat. The shadows clung to him like armor, the storm outside casting jagged lightning through the arched windows, slicing across his figure in harsh, fleeting light. His posture was carved from stone, broad shoulders draped in black, jaw taut, hands braced against the arms of his throne. But it was not stillness born of calm, it was the stillness of a predator before the strike. He rose slowly. And with each measured step down from the dais, the hall trembled. Not from the force of his feet on marble, but from the weight of his presence pressing against every throat, every chest. Wolves who moments earlier had jeered now swallowed hard, as though the air itself dared them not to breathe. The rejected girl, bruised, bloodied, stripped of worth by his own decree, did not move. Her body swayed with exhaustion, but her gaze stayed locked on him. She did not beg. She did not cry. And that defiance, small as it seemed, drew him down to her like iron to flame. The crowd broke into chants. Harsh. Demanding. Exile her. Cast her out. Make her pay. Each voice clawed for her destruction, eager to watch her crumble into dust. The chants rose in waves until they threatened to drown her completely. But then, without warning, he lifted his hand. It was not a shout. It was not a roar. It was a single gesture, sharp, commanding, absolute. And the entire hall fell silent. His eyes, dark, unyielding, flecked with something no one dared to name, fixed only on her. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside that gaze. When he spoke, his voice was low, weighted with an edge that cut through the silence like a blade. You think rejection frees you, little flame? His words curled in the air, dangerous and intimate all at once. No. It binds you tighter. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some recoiled as though burned, others leaned forward, hungry for the meaning behind his words. But he did not look at them. He looked only at her. Her knees trembled, not from weakness, but from the collision of rage and confusion that ripped through her veins. Why? Why would he say such a thing now? Why would the man who had reduced her to nothing dare call her flame? He descended the last step and stood before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that the scent of him, storm, iron, smoke, coiled around her throat like a shackle. He reached out, not gently, not kindly, but with the authority of a king whose word was law. His hand hovered near her jaw, fingers flexing as if fighting themselves, as if torn between holding and striking. The hall held its breath. But he did not touch her. Instead, he leaned closer, voice low enough that only she, and perhaps the gods listening, could hear. Do you think I do this out of mercy? He whispered, the tremor in his tone betraying something deeper, something dangerous. Do you think rejection spares you? It does not. It ties you to me in ways you will not understand until it is too late. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wanted to spit in his face, wanted to scream, wanted to deny the pull that burned beneath her skin every time his eyes found hers. But she couldn't move. She couldn't look away. The crowd shifted uneasily. They could feel it too, the tension stretching taut between them, raw and undeniable. The king's presence was not compassion, but dominance, layered with something he would not name. Something that made his rejection all the more cruel, all the more binding. And though fear surged through her veins, so did something else. Something reckless. Something that made her chest ache. Because beneath his fury, beneath his command, there was a flicker. A flicker of desire that betrayed him. He stepped closer. just a fraction. Just enough that she felt the brush of his breath against her skin, just enough that her wolf inside howled in recognition, clawing at her bones, desperate to close the space between them. Her body betrayed her resolve. Her breath hitched, her lips parted, her pulse quickened. She hated herself for it, hated him for causing it. But the truth lingered heavy between them, fear, trust, and attraction colliding in a storm she could not escape. And the hall, every single watching eye, sensed it. The whispers began again, but softer now, uncertain, laced with unease. The spectacle they had gathered for had shifted into something else, something dangerous. They could see it in his stance, in the way her body wavered toward him despite her defiance. The Alpha King, the man who had cast her aside before them all, was tethered to her still. Not with love. Not yet. But with something far stronger, far darker, something that would burn through the court like wildfire if it was ever unleashed. The storm outside roared. The torches guttered. And though she could barely breathe, though every muscle in her body screamed for her to escape, she lifted her chin and met his gaze with fire. If he would bind her with rejection, then she would chain him with defiance. Neither spoke. Neither moved. But in the silence, every soul in the hall felt it, the line between hatred and hunger had blurred, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between them was suffocating, yet it pulled her backward into memories she had buried so deep she thought they might never rise again. His stare, unyielding, dark, cutting straight through her, tore open the vault she had locked inside herself. And once opened, it spilled out like blood from a wound that had never healed. She could still see the firelight of that night. Not the warm glow of hearths or celebrations, but the sharp blaze of torches circling her in a ring of judgment. Her former pack gathered like vultures, their voices one, unified in disdain. She had stood in the center of their circle, trembling, but not from cold. Trembling from the sting of betrayal. Trembling from knowing that every bond she thought unbreakable had been severed in one brutal decree. Dangerous. The word had cut across the crowd like a blade. She cannot be trusted. Her blood is cursed. They had spoken as though she were not there. As though she were nothing more than a beast to be catalogued, shamed, condemned. She remembered the branding iron, its glow searing against the night sky, its heat carrying the promise of pain. They had pressed it against her skin, searing a mark that was meant not to kill, but to declare her to all as untouchable. Not worthy. A warning. The whispers had begun long before that night, but the branding sealed them into truth. Blood tied to the fire wolves, they said. Wolves who had been so fierce, so wild, that even the gods had feared them. Wolves who burned cities, who consumed forests, who bowed to no alpha, no council, no law. Wolves who had been erased, or so the world believed, until she was born. The first flicker of fire in her veins had been small, innocent, untrained. She had been a child, crying out in pain, and the spark had lit from her palm. That should have been her miracle, her blessing. Instead, it became her curse. Her pack had pulled away. Mothers shielding their children. Elders whispering with narrowed eyes. The day she bled her first shift, no one stood beside her. They watched instead, waiting to see if her body would erupt into flame, waiting to see if she would destroy herself before their eyes. And then the auction. The memory slammed into her chest with such force she nearly staggered in the present. She saw again the marketplace, the long rows of stone columns, the air thick with incense and dust. She remembered the iron collar forced around her neck, the way it bit into her skin as if to remind her she was no longer wolf, no longer woman, no longer part of them. She was an object. A spectacle. They had stood her on the platform, her wrists bound before her, her eyes dry though her soul screamed. Bidders had gathered, whispering, mocking, their voices spilling over each other in cruel delight. Too dangerous for a mate, but perhaps good for sport. Her blood runs with fire. She won't live long. She's nothing. Not worth the risk. And in the end, she had not been claimed. Not chosen. Not even as a pawn to be used. She had been dismissed. Sold into disgrace, not for her worth, but for her shame. That night, as the gavel struck and her fate was sealed, she had felt something inside her snap. A part of her had died in that circle, beneath those jeering eyes. She had sworn never to need them again, never to let anyone close enough to brand her with their rejection a second time. Yet here she was. In this hall, under this king's stare, her heart thudded with a familiar terror. The terror of belonging. Of wanting to belong. And she hated herself for it. Because his eyes unsettled her. Not because they condemned her like the rest, but because they didn't. He didn't see the brand on her wrist. He didn't see the cursed blood that had haunted her name. He didn't see the disgrace of the auction circle burned into her memory. He saw her. And that was somehow worse. Her breath caught in her throat, sharp and trembling. For the first time since the flames in her veins had betrayed her, she felt seen, not as a curse, not as a weapon, but as something more. Something she wasn't ready to name. The crowd's voices pressed against her mind, but she couldn't hear their words anymore. She heard only the echo of her past colliding with the weight of his gaze. The torment inside her rose like fire threatening to consume her from the inside out. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to hate every flicker of recognition in his eyes, every crack in his mask of control. But her wolf. The part of her that had been branded dangerous, cursed, unworthy, held differently. Her wolf recognized something her mind refused to name. Belonging. Her throat tightened. Her fists curled at her sides. She would not give him that power. Not after everything. Not after the circle, the auction, the brand. Not after rejection had carved her heart into scars she still bled from. And yet, as his gaze bore into her, as if daring her to stand taller, to claim the very blood they feared, she felt her chest ache with a longing she could not silence. The storm outside raged louder. The thunder rattled the bones of the hall. And inside, she was caught between two truths. She longed for belonging, yet rejection had made her too raw, too scarred to ever trust it again. The torment split her in two. Her silence was not weakness. It was survival. But his eyes, their weight, their hunger, their unspoken question, threatened to undo her. Because for the first time in her life, someone looked at her not with fear, not with hatred, not with dismissal. But with recognition. And that recognition was more dangerous than any chain, any brand, any curse she had ever carried. The descent was silent, save for the echo of their footsteps against ancient stone. Each step carried her deeper into a place that smelled of ash and memory, as if the walls themselves remembered the trials once held here. The king walked ahead, his figure cast long by the flicker of the torches he had lit. Shadows swayed over carvings etched into the stone, wolves with crowns of flame, their jaws open as if mid-roar, their eyes hollow but unyielding. The air was heavy, not with dust, but with something older, weight, reverence, threat. She felt it cling to her skin, seeping through her bones like a warning. Her gaze caught the carvings again, unable to look away. Wolves crowned with fire. Wolves standing on mountains that bled smoke. Wolves bowing to no one. She knew those stories. She had heard them whispered in contempt, retold as warnings to children, spat out as curses when her name was mentioned. Yet seeing them here, etched into stone by hands long dead, was different. It made the whispers real. It made her blood undeniable. The king stopped at the base of the chamber. His hand brushed the surface of the largest carving, an alpha wolf with a mane of flame stretching into the heavens. His voice was low, steady, but edged with something she could not name. This place was built to remind us, he said, of what came before. Of what was feared. Of what was promised. The torches hissed as if answering him. The carvings seemed to shift, alive in the dance of firelight. Her pulse quickened. He turned to her, his gaze piercing, the weight of his presence amplified in the cavernous chamber. You carry their blood, he said. The blood we were warned would return. And now, here you stand. The words cut through her, sharper than steel. She wanted to deny it, to spit back that she was nothing, no one, only the cast-off of a pack that had branded her like cattle. But the faint warmth spreading across her skin betrayed her. Her wrist burned. Not with pain, but with heat. The brand they had pressed into her flesh, the mark of her shame, glowed faintly, its edges alive with ember light. She pulled her arm close, as though hiding it could undo what was happening. But the glow only deepened, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The king watched, his jaw tight, his eyes unwavering. "The prophecy," he said, his tone like the crack of thunder, "speaks of the rejected one. Cast out by her own, marked by fire, destined to either ignite salvation, or bring ruin to all alphas." The words filled the chamber, bouncing off stone, reverberating until they seemed to sink beneath her skin. She trembled. Not from the cold of the underground, but from the storm rising inside her. Salvation or ruin? She had been nothing more than their outcast, their shame, their warning. How could she hold the weight of a prophecy carved into stone before her birth? Her voice cracked as it escaped her throat, fragile and raw. "I was nothing more than their cast-off. How could I be chosen?" The walls seemed to lean closer, listening. The torches hissed louder, their flames bending toward her as if in recognition. The glow along her wrist spread, curling upward along the veins of her arm, faint and shimmering, like molten fire beneath her skin. Her breath quickened. She stumbled back, clutching at her arm as though she could smother the light. Panic tightened her chest. She had lived her life surviving rejection, burying the remnants of hope, choking down the longing for belonging. Now the very thing she had been cursed for was claiming her, as if to say she had never truly been free of it. The king closed the distance between them, his presence consuming the chamber. His hand lifted, not touching her, but hovering just above her arm, close enough that the air between them thickened. His eyes burned, not with pity, but with recognition. "You doubt because they taught you to doubt," he said, voice low, roughened by something deeper than authority. "They cast you aside because they feared what you are. Fear and weakness blind them. But prophecy does not bend to their rejection. It does not care for their judgment." His words struck her deeper than any brand. She wanted to look away, to deny him, to keep the walls of her scarred heart intact. But the light along her skin betrayed her again, glowing brighter, spiraling from her wrist to her shoulder, tracing patterns like ancient runes. The carvings on the walls seemed to respond, their etched flames flickering with faint life. Her knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of it. She pressed a hand against the cold stone beside her, anchoring herself, her breath ragged. The chamber itself felt alive, pulsing, breathing with her. "You think you are nothing," he continued, voice cutting through her spiral, "because they named you nothing. But you stand here in a place built by their ancestors, beneath a prophecy older than their bloodlines. And the stone recognizes you. The fire recognizes you. Your own body recognizes you." Her chest ached. Her heart warred against itself. Part of her wanted to scream that he was wrong, that she could not be the one prophecy had named. Another part, the part she had buried beneath years of shame and rejection, wanted to believe him. Her wolf stirred, restless, her instincts clawing at her ribcage. It had been silent for so long, smothered by chains of fear and memory. Now it pressed forward, growling in her veins, not in defiance, but in recognition. She clenched her jaw, forcing her voice past the weight in her throat. "If I am this, if the prophecy is true, then what am I to you?" The chamber stilled. His silence was heavier than any answer could have been. He studied her, his expression carved from stone, his eyes burning like twin torches. Finally, his words came, slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of both truth and warning. "To me, you are either the key that will break us, or the flame that will bind us all." The glow on her skin flared brighter, lighting the chamber in a fiery hue. And for the first time, she realized the truth she had tried so desperately to escape: she was no longer the cast-off. She was the fulcrum upon which fate itself now balanced. And that was a weight heavier than rejection had ever been. The chamber doors burst open with a violence that made the torches sputter, their flames bending sideways as though cowed by the storm of voices that rushed in. The sound was a clash of thunder and venom, dozens of footsteps, the hard scrape of steel, the thick rustle of robes heavy with centuries of authority. The council had arrived. Elders draped in ceremonial garments filed into the ruins like a wall of judgment, their eyes sharp, their mouths already wet with condemnation. Each robe bore the colors of an ancient lineage, deep crimsons, storm grays, a green so dark it was almost black. Gold thread marked their status, but the stench of fear clung tighter than silk. They came not as wise keepers of tradition, but as wolves desperate to cage what they could not control. Their voices rose in unison, overlapping until the chamber became a battlefield of accusation. Witchcraft, one bellowed, his finger stabbing the air toward her as if his very gesture could brand her guilty. Rebellion, another cried, the word ringing like a whip crack. Unbridled fire. She is cursed, a danger to us all. The walls caught their echoes and threw them back in waves, each word battering her already bruised spirit. Her chest rose and fell, her wolf clawing to answer, but still she held herself still, her fists curling tight enough that her nails bit into her palms. The king did not move. His stance was rigid, his jaw locked, his hand curled into a fist at his side. His eyes flicked from her glowing skin to the storm of elders, and though his face remained carved in stone, a tremor of conflict rippled beneath the mask. The crowd outside had followed. Voices swelled from above the chamber, a chorus of jeers and hunger, echoing down the stairwell. They fed on the council's fury like vultures circling carrion. Exile her, they chanted. Break her. Burn her. The words struck her like blows, but none pierced as deep as the sight of those who had once been her kin, the familiar faces among the crowd, those who had sold her shame for coin and mockery. Their mouths twisted in delight as they hurled their venom. Their laughter was a blade twisting in wounds that had never healed. The king raised his hand, palm open, commanding silence. The crowd faltered, though their rage trembled on the edge of obedience. His voice, when it came, was cold steel. You forget yourselves, he said. This chamber is not your arena. These stones were built to hold judgment beyond your mortal cries. You will remember your place. But his authority cracked against the tide. For even as he spoke, the air shifted. From the edges of the ruin, where torchlight could not reach, shadows rippled. They crawled along the walls, spilling like smoke, thick and writhing. Then the shapes took form, eyes opening in the black, gleaming like shards of ice. Shadow beasts. Creatures born from the forgotten places, where fear breeds form. Their bodies were fluid, half wolf, half nightmare, their jaws dripping with a darkness that seemed to devour the very air. They had not come by chance. They were summoned by the storm of fear and hate that filled the hall. They were judgment made flesh. The elders recoiled, their robes snapping as they staggered back, their cries breaking with terror. But the crowd above did not stop. Their chants grew louder, feeding the beasts. Exile her. Break her. Burn her. The shadows surged forward. Her body locked, her heart thundering against her ribs. The glow along her arm blazed, the fire in her blood answering even before her mind did. The heat seared her skin, not in pain but in release, as though her wolf demanded to rise against this tide. She stepped back, the torchlight flickering wildly against her. Fear clawed her throat, but beneath it burned something sharper. Something fierce. The king moved then, stepping in front of her, his hand outstretched, his command splitting the chamber like lightning. Enough. The shadows paused, their bodies shivering, their eyes fixed on him. But they did not retreat. Because their hunger was not for him. It was for her. She could feel it, the pull, the way their bodies bent toward her like moths to flame. She was their center, their target, their truth. Her breath shuddered. Her wolf surged, whispering not with fear, but with power. They come because of you. They rise because of you. You are the fire that calls them. And yet the king's presence anchored her. He was both shield and chain, his dominance a wall between her and the creatures. But the weight of his hesitation cut through her. For she saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the pause in his stance. He was torn. Torn between duty to his throne and the bond tethering him to her. Torn between the council's cries for blood and the truth that flared in his veins when his gaze met hers. The council saw it too. They roared louder, their voices sharpened by desperation. Do not let her corrupt you. She will bring ruin to the throne. She is a plague, burn her before the fire consumes us all. The beasts pressed forward again, jaws snapping, claws scraping the stone. And in that chaos, hands seized her from behind. Rough, unyielding, dragging her backward. She thrashed, her glow flaring, but the grip of guards tightened like iron. Their claws dug into her arms, pulling her from the king's shadow, wrenching her toward the chanting crowd. Her feet scraped stone, her body twisting, her breath a ragged snarl. The chamber blurred in motion, the king's figure standing still in the storm, the beasts surging, the council shouting, the torches spitting sparks. Her voice rose above it, low and fierce, vibrating with the force of everything she had buried and everything she had become. If you cast me out again, she growled, her eyes burning with the fire in her blood, then I will return not as prey, but as vengeance. The words hung in the air, trembling, alive. Even the beasts stilled, their eyes widening as though they too had heard a prophecy in her vow. The guards dragged her toward the stairwell, the chants of the crowd raining down like a storm of stones. Exile her. Break her. Burn her. Her body was bound, her spirit pulled, but her fire would not be smothered. And though the king's lips did not part, his silence carried its own weight. For he did not stop them. He only watched, torn between the man and the crown, his chest rising with the war he could not yet fight. And as she was pulled away, the last glimpse she caught of him was not of a ruler made of stone, but of a man burning in chains. The air in the catacombs was heavy. It carried the weight of centuries, the smell of damp stone, and the faint trace of blood soaked into the ground from trials long forgotten. The world above raged with voices still, chants, decrees, the roar of judgment echoing across the marketplace, but here, beneath the marble bones of the hall, silence clung like a second skin. She sat hunched against the wall, her body battered, her wrists raw from where the guards had dragged her. The glow in her veins had dimmed, retreating beneath layers of exhaustion and fury. Yet her spirit did not bow. Her breath came slow, deliberate, as if each inhale was an act of defiance. The flicker of a candle broke the darkness. At first, she thought it another guard come to drag her farther into the pit. Her body tensed, ready to claw against whatever hands reached for her. But the figure who emerged from the shadows was no guard. It was him. The king. He carried the flame in his hand, the golden light spilling over his features. The hardness of his jaw. The shadow in his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. He looked less like a sovereign and more like a man who hadn't slept in years. His robes were torn from the scuffle in the chamber. His hair fell loose across his brow, damp with sweat from the storm still raging above. Their eyes met, and for a breath the silence shifted. Not heavy. Not suffocating. But charged. Alive. She wanted to snarl at him, to spit the words that clawed her throat. Why did you let them drag me? Why didn't you stop them? But she could not speak. Because his gaze told its own story. One of torment. One of chains not bound by steel but by duty. Without a word, he knelt before her. The flame trembled in his hand as he set the candle down between them, casting its glow across her torn skin. Then, slowly, he reached into his cloak, pulling free a strip of linen. He dipped it into a vial of water, the sound of liquid breaking the silence. She flinched when he reached for her arm. Instinct. Her wolf bristled. Her body coiled. But his touch was careful, firm, yes, but not cruel. His fingers steadied her wrist as he pressed the damp cloth to her wounds. The sting of it made her hiss, her teeth flashing. You should let me bleed, she whispered, her voice raw. His reply was low, steady. I've seen too much blood to waste yours. The cloth moved with deliberate care, wiping away the grime, the dried scarlet. She studied him as he worked, every line of his face etched with something deeper than mere concern. Something heavier than mere guilt. "You think I am merciful," he murmured after a long silence. "But I am not. Not to my enemies. Not to myself." And yet, his voice faltered, his jaw tightening. "Yet when I saw them touch you, I wanted to tear them apart." The confession dropped like a stone between them, rippling through the silence. Her throat tightened. Anger and confusion warred inside her chest. She wanted to believe he spoke truth, but the memory of his stillness, his silence as she was dragged away, burned too deep. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you stand there and watch?" He lifted his gaze to hers. The candlelight caught his eyes, making them gleam like molten gold. There was no shield in them now. No crown. No throne. Only weariness. Only honesty. "Because kings are not men," he said quietly. "They are cages. And I have lived inside mine for so long I no longer know where it ends and I begin." The words pierced her. Not because they excused him, but because they revealed him. The loneliness she had carried her whole life, cast aside, rejected, branded unworthy, echoed in his voice. It startled her. For the first time, she saw not just the alpha who had rejected her, not just the ruler who had bound himself in silence, but the man who had bled beneath the weight of duty until his soul had nearly cracked. He finished tending her arm, the cloth now streaked with crimson. His hand lingered, the warmth of his skin brushing hers, the faint tremor betraying the storm he carried inside. "Why are you here?" she whispered. He hesitated. The truth balanced on the edge of his tongue like a blade. And then, softly, he said, "Because I could not let them take you from me. Not yet. Not like this." Her chest tightened, her breath catching as if the air itself had turned against her. His hand withdrew, his fingers curling against his knee as though he feared the very nearness of her. Yet his eyes did not leave hers. "I know what they call you," he continued. "Cursed. Dangerous. Unworthy. I know what it is to carry names that cut deeper than any blade." His jaw flexed, his voice roughening with memory. "My own court once branded me weak. A boy unfit for the crown. They buried my father with praise and left me with chains of doubt so heavy I almost welcomed death." Her heart stumbled. For she had not expected this. Not his scars laid bare beside hers. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that brushed like fire across her skin. "But I see you. Not the curse. Not the shame. Not the fire they fear." His eyes burned into hers. "I see you." The words struck her harder than rejection ever had. They carved through the layers of doubt, the scars of humiliation, the walls she had built to survive. Her breath shuddered. Her wolf surged. Her hand twitched on the ground between them. His hand mirrored it. For a moment, they hovered there, two lives bound by pain, two flames drawn toward the same spark. Their fingers almost touched. Almost. The heat of it was undeniable. It hummed in the air, pulled at their breaths, curled in the silence like an unspoken vow. But fear held her back. Fear of surrender. Fear of trust. Fear of being broken again. She pulled her hand back, her body trembling. Suspicion laced her voice when she finally spoke. "You say you see me. But will you still see me when the fire consumes everything?" His answer came without hesitation, low and certain. "If the fire consumes, I will burn with it." Her chest tightened, her breath stilled, her entire being caught in the gravity of his vow. And for the first time, in the silence of the catacombs beneath the market hall, they were not alpha and outcast. Not king and cursed. But two souls stripped of titles, of masks, of chains. Two equals. And though the storm still raged above, here in the flicker of candlelight, the world itself seemed to pause. The council chamber burned with smoke and the bitter scent of betrayal. Ash curled into the air, embers falling like shattered stars. She stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, her wrists blistered where the silver shackles had bitten into her skin. The metal still clung to her, smoldering, melted half open by the sudden flare of her fire. Her wolf trembled beneath her flesh, pacing, snarling, hungry to strike again, but her heart carried a wound that no flame could cauterize. The king had not spoken. Not when her lineage was unveiled. Not when the word firewolf left the counselor's mouth like poison spat into the air. He had not defended her. His silence had been worse than condemnation. It had been abandonment in its purest form. She scanned the faces around her, the snarling elders, the fearful wolves pressing back against the walls, the guards unsure whether to seize her or run. Their eyes cut her open with every glance, monster, danger, curse. And then she found him. His throne stood shadowed at the far end of the hall, its carvings blackened by the fire she had unleashed. He had risen, his form caught between fury and something unspoken. His hand hovered as though he had meant to reach for her, but never did. His eyes held the weight of war. Her chest clenched. She had wanted his defense, his voice, his choice. Instead, she had received silence. "Never again," she whispered, voice raw. "Never again will I wait for someone to save me." Her wolf pressed against her ribs, claw scraping bone, demanding release. The power burned under her skin, her markings glowing brighter than torchlight, spilling flame across the floor. The council recoiled, robes singed, curses spat in panic. "Seize her," one of them cried. "Kill her before she burns us all," shouted another. But none dared approach. The king finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos like steel against stone. "Enough." His command silenced the room. Even her fire faltered, dimming slightly at the resonance of his tone. But his gaze did not soothe, it condemned. Or perhaps it confessed his fear. "You knew," she breathed, her voice shaking. "You saw me. You knew what I was. And still you," the words broke before she could finish. He stepped down from the throne, slow, measured, a ruler reclaiming his ground. But he did not come to her. His steps circled, as though wary of her flame, as though the bond between them could be ignored if he refused to draw near. "You were never meant to know the truth this way," he said. Her laughter tore free, sharp and bitter. "The truth? You mean the lie you kept hidden while you looked at me as if..." She stopped herself, the fire around her guttering. She would not give him the satisfaction of her confession. She would not let him hear how much she had hoped. The wolf within her snapped. The bond burned like chains. Rage flared, and with it, heat exploded outward. Flames raced up the columns, cracked the stone beneath her feet, seared the air until even the elders shielded their faces. He did not move. He bore her fire like a sentence. But he did not choose her. Her heart broke on that truth. And in its shattering, her wolf lunged. Her body shifted with a cry, bones cracking, fire bleeding into fur. Where once stood the cast-off girl now erupted a beast wreathed in flame, her mane blazing, her claws dripping embers. The hall gasped as one, some crying prayers, others cursing her name. She roared. The sound shook the very walls. And in that moment, her fury spared no one. Pillars split, tapestries disintegrated into ash, the council scrambled like rats from fire. Only he remained still, his cloak whipping in the heat, his stare locked on hers. The wolf lunged toward the shackles at her wrists, burning them to molten ruin, then turned her gaze to the throne itself. A warning. A promise. A farewell. Then she fled. The flames trailed behind her, scorching a path through the hall, past terrified guards, through broken doors, out into the night. The kingdom roared with alarm bells as her fire spread into the dark sky. Wolves howled in panic, villagers stumbled awake, and the scent of smoke carried across the forest. But she did not stop. Her paws pounded the earth, each stride fueled by rage and heartbreak. Her fire lit the trees, her markings searing like brands against the night. The bond tugged at her, pulling her back toward him, but she tore against it with every ounce of will. No more, she thought, her wolf's voice and her own merging into one. If the world calls me curse, then curse I will be. If they call me ruin, then ruin I will bring. Her chest ached. Not from the run. Not from the fire. But from the silence of the one she had wanted to believe in. Behind her, the kingdom burned. Before her, the wild opened endless and merciless. And somewhere deep in her bones, the prophecy whispered, salvation or ruin, salvation or ruin. Tears cut down her wolf's face, vanishing into steam. She had given them trust. She had given him a chance. And all of it had been broken in the space of a breath. The night swallowed her. But the fire she left behind promised one thing: she would never again be ignored. The night had not yet cooled from her escape when the sound of drums thundered through the valley. The kingdom lay shrouded in smoke and unease, the people restless, the guards broken into scattered ranks, their loyalty shaken by what they had witnessed. Yet before the embers had even died, another storm pressed against the borders. Wolves. Many. Too many. From the forest's edge, the rival packs advanced, their torches rising like a wall of firelight against the horizon. Their howls shook the air, their banners raised high, each bearing the sigil of packs long thought subdued by the king's line. At their front walked the dark Alpha, broad, armored in leather and bone, his presence dripping with conquest. His eyes shone with hunger, not just for the throne but for blood, for dominance carved out of ruin. The king stood upon the shattered steps of his hall, his guards forming a fractured line behind him, the council huddled in fear. His people whispered, asking if this was judgment, if the prophecy had brought them to the edge of extinction. He gave no answer. For in the hollow space of his silence still burned her absence. Then the air cracked. The flames she had carried into exile roared back into existence, sweeping the earth in a sudden spiral of fire. The rival packs halted, their torches dimmed by the blaze that descended from the hills. And from that inferno stepped her. Her body glowed with fire that clung to her skin like armor. Each step fractured the stone beneath her, heat trembling in waves across the field. Her eyes blazed silver and white, no longer the gaze of a woman cast aside but of something older, something feared, something divine. The wolves drew back, their growls uneasy, their instincts screaming that what approached was no ordinary shifter. Even the rival Alpha hesitated, his lips peeling back in a snarl but his footing shifting slightly as though he faced not prey, not rival, but judgment itself. The king felt the bonds seize in his chest. It dragged him down, forced his knees against the broken stone. Not in surrender, not in defeat, but in recognition. He bowed not as ruler, not as sovereign, but as man to the only force that had ever unraveled him. And in her voice the world shook. I was never your prisoner. Her words ignited the ground, flame spilling in arcs around her. I was never your sacrifice. Her gaze burned into the council, their robes blackened from the heat, their lips silent at last. I am flame. I am fury. I am the forgotten queen. The statues that lined the square cracked in that instant, their stone faces breaking apart, centuries of silence giving way to her fire. Sparks bled from the fractures, inscriptions long buried glowing bright as if awakened by her claim. The marketplace trembled. The wolves howled. And then silence. All eyes turned to her, every breath of air stolen by her presence. For the first time since the prophecy was carved into memory, it had a face. It was hers. The rival Alpha stepped forward, his grin sharp, his teeth gleaming. His voice cut through the stillness, low and mocking. Queen of Ashes. You burn well, but fire dies without fuel. Your flames cannot crown you. Only blood can. His wolves echoed his growl, pressing closer, their eyes locked on her as prey, as prize. She met his words with nothing but the tightening of her jaw, the shimmer of her flame coiling higher, licking the edges of the broken hull. The king rose halfway, his chest heaving, but stopped when her gaze turned toward him. It was not fury that held him still. It was her choice. For the first time, she was not the one waiting to be named, to be chosen. Now he waited, for her. The rival Alpha drew a blade of blackened steel, ancient, carved with runes that drank the light around it. He raised it toward her, his stance daring, his arrogance absolute. And in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The square stood divided, her fire on one side, the rival alpha's shadow on the other. The king caught in between, his people broken, his throne crumbling, his destiny chained to the decision about to unfold. She did not flinch. Every scar of rejection, every memory of chains, every whisper of curse and danger and unworthy poured into her veins. Her wolf surged, not as beast of instinct, but as sovereign force. She did not roar. She did not shift. She only stood, her flame answering the call of every star above, every ember buried in the earth, every prophecy etched in stone. And the fire obeyed. The rival alpha snarled, lunging forward. His wolves surged. The king drew his blade, his loyalty tearing him toward her side. The council shrieked in terror. The prophecy ignited. Smoke curled in ribbons through the shattered hall, the scent of charred stone and scorched earth clinging to every breath. The fire she had unleashed still licked the walls, a living thing that refused to die down, its glow painting her in shifting shades of crimson and gold. The rival alpha stood halted at the far end, his weapon trembling in his grip, not with fear, but with the weight of what he saw in her. Time stretched thin, every heartbeat pounding louder than the echo of collapsing stone. Her chest rose and fell, each breath trembling with the memory of chains, each exhale fueled by defiance that would no longer be caged. Behind her, the council crouched in their ashes, their judgment silenced. To her right, the people of the court trembled, torn between awe and terror, their whispers swallowed by the fire. And before her, between all of them, the king lingered in stillness, his hand upon his sword, his eyes caught not by her flames but by her. She turned, her gaze sweeping across them all. For the first time, her voice rose not in plea, not in shame, but in command. "Would you have feared me too?" The words fell heavy, soaked in grief and fury. "Would you have bound me in silver, as they did? Would you have chained me to silence, branded me curse, and cast me into the shadows?" The silence trembled. The flames hissed. Her voice grew sharper, cutting through the smoke like steel. "Or would you have fought beside me?" The question hung suspended in the air, too vast, too heavy to be ignored. It struck the king first, his shoulders flinching as though she had carved into his very chest. It struck the council, their lips parting with guilt they would not admit. It struck the rival alpha, his grin faltering, for even he could see the choice that broke kingdoms was not his to mock. She stood alone, yet not alone. Fire roared behind her. Shadows writhed ahead of her. And between them all, her heart, torn open, demanding to be seen. The king's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was louder than the screams of war, louder than the chants of the wolves beyond. His silence was a wound, and yet it was also a promise waiting to be made. The flames climbed higher, cracking the ancient stone, as though the hall itself demanded an answer. Her silver gaze never wavered, fixed on him, daring him to speak, daring him to choose. And then, darkness. The hall dissolved into smoke and shadow. Her voice lingered, suspended in the firelit silence, echoing like a vow burned into the marrow of every soul who had heard her. "Would you have feared me too? Or would you have fought beside me?" The flame swallowed the last of her form, leaving only the weight of her question burning in the dark. And then, like a whisper pressed against the skin of every listener. If her fire burned into your soul, subscribe to Sophie's Romance Collections. Here, we tell tales that never die. The silence stretched so thick it felt alive, a silence that pressed against the chest, suffocating, demanding to be broken. Her flames, once wild and consuming, began to settle into embers that danced along the cracked walls, glowing faintly like blood that refused to dry. Every face in that hall was etched in terror or reverence, but none dared move. Not even the king. Not even the rival alpha who had come to crown himself over her ashes. And then, another sound came. It did not belong to her, nor to the king, nor to the wolves that quaked in fear. It was deeper, older, resonating like stone grinding against stone. A voice that seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself, crawling into every bone. She is not the only one. The words cut through the embers like ice water over flame. Wolves dropped to their knees, some covering their ears as if to shut out the impossible sound. The rival alpha staggered back, his arrogance cracking into raw fear. Even the king, who had weathered battles and betrayals, clenched his fists as the weight of those words pressed down upon him. The ground beneath their feet groaned, trembling as though the ruins themselves resented being disturbed. Cracks raced along the marble floor, splitting it open like the ribs of a carcass. From those fractures, shadows seeped, thick and writhing like tar, reaching outward, curling against her ankles, then retreating as though they feared her flame yet hungered for her blood. Her silver-lit eyes widened. For the first time since claiming her fire, her body trembled, not with weakness, but with the knowledge that something vaster, something darker, had been waiting all along. The voice returned, layered, ancient, as though 1,000 forgotten kings spoke in unison. The true Alpha is yet to rise. The words reverberated against the ancient stone, against their very marrow. The council collapsed into prayer, whispering frantic chants that did nothing to ease the suffocating dread. The rival Alpha snarled, but the sound was hollow, broken by the weight of prophecy. And the king, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed not on her flames but on the darkness unraveling beneath them. The prophecy she had thought was hers alone, the burden she had carried as rejection and curse, it was no longer hers to bear alone. There was another. Perhaps greater. Perhaps worse. Perhaps the very reason the gods had scarred her bloodline with fire. The ground split wider. Dust rained from the high ceilings of the hall. Ancient statues crumbled, their stone eyes falling, lifeless, onto the shattered floor. From the fractures, shadows thickened, whispering in tongues that had not been spoken for centuries. And through it all, the embers at her feet refused to die, as though the fire itself knew it was being tested. Her chest rose and fell sharply, her hand twitching at her side, wanting to reach for the king though trust had been shattered, though betrayal still carved fresh wounds into her heart. Yet even through her rage, she could feel it, that pull. That inevitable truth. Her fire was not the end. It was only the beginning. The king took a single step forward. His hand hovered at the hilt of his blade, his eyes fixed on her as though waiting for her to tell him what to do. For once, the ruler did not lead. For once, he deferred to her. But she had no answer. The ground roared again, louder, sharper, a crack like thunder splitting the earth beneath the hall. Wolves screamed, scattering. The rival Alpha cursed, his bravado dissolving as shadows slithered toward him. They touched his boots, and in an instant, his body jolted as though 1,000 knives had driven into him. He clawed at his chest, eyes bulging, until the shadows retreated, leaving him gasping in humiliation before all. She stared, her lips parting, the realization settling heavy in her chest. These shadows, they were not random. They were choosing. Testing. Waiting. Her fire flared instinctively, defying the encroaching dark. Flames coiled around her like armor, her silver eyes narrowing as the hall filled with both firelight and shadow. Two forces at war, yet bound by prophecy neither would speak aloud. This is not over. The voice whispered once more, but this time, it came from the fractures beneath her own feet. It curled around her ears, slid down her spine, made her blood burn hotter than flame. It was not speaking to the court. Not to the king. Not even to the rival Alpha. It was speaking to her. Her jaw clenched, breath shaking. She had fought rejection, betrayal, exile, and flame. Yet now, the true battle revealed itself. This was never about her shame. Never about her curse. It was about destiny, the kind that devoured empires and demanded blood as its currency. The fire pulsed brighter, wrapping her in silver light. The shadows hissed, retreating back into the cracks, though not gone, never gone. They had marked her. And they had promised. The king's voice broke the silence at last, rough, low, strained by what he had just witnessed. What, are you? Her lips parted, but no answer came. Because even she did not know anymore. The cracks sealed slowly, groaning like a beast retreating into slumber, leaving the ruins trembling, haunted by what had stirred. Dust settled. Wolves knelt. And silence reclaimed the hall. Her fire dimmed, flickering down into faint embers that clung stubbornly to her skin. She looked once more at the king, at the council, at the rival alpha who now avoided her gaze, shamed by his own terror. And she knew, this was only the first ripple of something far larger. Her voice broke the silence, soft, but resolute, echoing into the fractured air. This isn't over. And though her words were quiet, they rang louder than the prophecy itself.